originating from the podcast studio inside FAM 360's headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. This is the Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast. The Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast is designed to encourage, equip, and inspire our audience through a combination of inspirational stories and real-life experiences shared by other successful and skilled leaders in a variety of vocations. We hope that the Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast empowers each one of us to step out, step up, and ultimately thrive as leaders. Now here's our host, Mr. Matt Maloney.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Mr. Matt Maloney. I am really intrigued about today's guest. Before I introduce him, I'd like to share a little bit about his background before I reveal who today's guest is. So he is on a mission to change the lives through the power of understanding how our words and our mindset truly are powerful forces that matter. He's a lifelong healthcare industry executive, and he's an author, speaker, podcast host, what I would like to call a consulting kind of coach that teaches his audiences and clients how to take and hold our words, redirect our mindsets, and transform our thoughts, our beliefs, our intentions, and our actions into meaningful outcomes. His best-selling book, Above the Chatter, Our Words Matter, Powerful Words That Changed My Life Forever, is the foundation of all of his messages in his teachings, in his book, in his coachings, in his TEDx talk, The Secret to Changing Negative Self-Talk by renewing your mindset, has reached over a quarter million individuals worldwide. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my guest, who I'm super excited for you guys to know, Mr. Bruce Pulver. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you, Matt. It's great to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm really excited. So in full transparency, I'm about a third of the way through your book right now. I'm not all the way through the book yet, but I am really intrigued by the things that I'm seeing in the book. It's really good stuff. So I just wanted to affirm you on that. You put together a really great book.
Thank you. We'll talk about it. It was a gift, and we'll talk through the journey of that. And never sat down to write a book.
Yeah.
It just became something that was just in my DNA after a while. So.
Oh, sure. Well, it's amazing how, as life goes on, time goes on, the things that tug at our heartstrings and really drive us to our purpose starts to kind of come into focus and change over time. I mean, maybe there are those people that are just born knowing I wasn't one of those people. Over time, it took some time for me to learn what my purpose was. But I'd love to just start off by hearing how you, this kind of lifelong healthcare executive, decided to springboard into a life of obviously becoming an author, but coaching, teaching, the practice, the science of just mindset and words, and kind of how did that all play out?
Yeah, and it's a lifelong journey. If I go back to the very beginning and talk about why healthcare, the healthcare system, the healthcare industry, the healthcare clinicians, the researchers are the reason that I'm here. On the day I was born, my mother suffered a dissecting aortic aneurysm during labor with me. And back then, which was many years ago, that was experimental at best. No one had survived an aortic dissection during labor longer than 72 hours.
Wow.
Prior to my mother.
Wow.
So that whole situation, we were in New Haven, Connecticut. My parents had selected Grace. It was called Grace New Haven Medical Center at the time, which is now affiliated with Yale, which it was then as well.
Yeah.
And there were some surgeons, cardiologists there who had just perfected aortic valve replacement when my mother was admitted. I mean, within a few months, right?
Talk about divine intervention. I mean, with all that was all put together.
Absolutely. So they delivered me, and she plunged into this massive battle for her life with all these caregivers. There were 17 pints of blood needed for the heart-lung machine. All 17 of them were from our church. She fought a battle. It was 3 surgeries plus the C-section, all experimental, and she didn't see me until I was 60 days old. So did that mean I was going to get into healthcare when I was 3 years old? No. Of course not. I mean, that sort of evolved through, college and industry research and what made sense, but I always had this pull to do something within the healthcare industry. I was raised in a family after that period of time. I mean, my mother was just so grateful I mean, every day was a gift. She saw it that way. And my father, who I talk about this a lot, was really the silent patient in that whole ordeal. Just loved words. He loved crossword puzzles, poems he wrote, just for hobby. And for me, the transition from how did, the healthcare piece and then all about mindset and all about words come together, it was through what I call in my life a BAM moment of my own.
Yeah.
I mean, my mom and dad had a BAM moment the day she went into labor.
Yeah.
Mine was after 25 years in the healthcare industry, mergers, acquisitions, downsizing.
Yeah.
I was wrapped up in one of those.
Yeah.
And the morning after,
sometimes you're on the benefit side, sometimes you're not on but it all depends upon how we look at it, right? Which we'll learn about today.
Well, absolutely. And devastating, right? The 2x4 in the back of the head. Well, what do you mean? You must have meant somebody else, right? I'm on that list. I thought I should be on the keep list, not the go list, right?
Right.
So you're not going through all those things in your mind. Right, you're kidding me, right? All the emotions, right? Like anything in life where it's not just a job, but maybe it's a diagnosis, maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's, some health issue or something, right? So the morning after that situation, that layoff, I woke up and just in my head, one word was pounding. It said, Bruce, you have to be strong. And I just looked at the word, wrote it vertically, and immediately just wrote, stand tall, remain optimistic, now go for it. The 6 letters of strong became what the word meant.
Yeah.
And that's how it launched into just, okay, what's tomorrow going to be? What's the day after that going to be? And it just, every morning, I was just divinely, I believe, with all of my heart, downloaded.
It goes back to the mindset, and you talked about this, and I think you and I have talked about it even over phone conversations. It's not really, if we look at our situations, it's not about what's happening to us, it's what's happening for us. Right?
100%.
And there's always, in everything, and I know it's hard, especially if we're in the valley of the shadow of death, if we're in a situation, maybe even the worst of worst situations, there's always something that is there that's going to be better for us on the other side. But we don't always see that in the midst of that.
That is not something that you can throw a light switch to.
No.
And I'm blessed because I grew up with a grateful family in it. Like day one was that valley for me. Not knowing it, right? But for them, my parents, it was. And and they had both passed when this BAM moment for me happened, so I didn't have a go-to.
They had already passed away?
They had passed, right?
Okay, yeah.
So my go-to was them as a source, my faith, my parents, my upbringing, just, hey, you got to make something out of this.
Yeah.
Life's not happening to me. This is happening for me. And I may not know why yet, but just stay on the path.
Yeah, that's great.
And that's how it evolved.
So with that, why don't we take a moment just to share with the audience here, just let's dive into the book a little bit and maybe talk about just some key concepts, some key teachings that you talk about in the book. Just take us through maybe a high-level journey, front cover to back cover, and then talk about a couple of things that you think really you want the audience to learn and resonate, and that may entice them to also go out and buy the book.
Yeah. Well, the book was a journal, and it wasn't the individual chapters to start with.
Yeah.
It was just give me the word for the day, whatever that word was going to be. One of them is, I truly believe we all have gifts, right? We're all different, but that's the gift of it, right? And so gifts, I just wrote it vertically. God installed features to share.
Yeah.
So what does that mean, right? That means we have a responsibility to develop them, identify them, grow them, right, to the maximum potential. They are naturally within us.
Yeah, they're given to it. Hence, they're gifts.
Right.
But we have to nurture them. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
For what reason? To share them. I mean, none of us could make it alone in this world. So the fact that we do have these gifts, it's our responsibility to develop them and share them with others is how we all lift. So I really think that if we're really looking at giving before we get, that's one other teaching that my father definitely pounded in our head. The only time get should come before give, he said, was in the dictionary.
Yeah, right. I love that.
So what does that mean? So how can you look to assist Granted, we've all gone 1,000 miles an hour. We all got our goals. We all got our objectives. We want to grow our business. We want to do all those things. But and I do talk a lot about mindset, but I also have sort of started thinking more recently about heart set. Because mindset is kind of what we think, what we do, the actions we take, but the basis of that should come from our heart.
The root is absolutely from the heart.
Right. So, like I said, the book never really started as a book. It was a journal of words. And then there was, 3 days in a coffee shop of taking the printout and saying, okay, this chapter kind of sounds like when our batteries are low. So how can we orient, recharging ourselves, whether it's finding some music to listen to, and that was one of the words I wrote, or whether it was to find a solemn place or some way to kind of replug in, right? We never let our phones go to zero.
Oh, right.
So maybe we need to recharge. And then there was a chapter, I was thinking about my daughters as they were teens as I was writing this book, and just the differences that we have is what we should celebrate, not compare. Middle school, high school, you think about that from a parenting standpoint. And so one of the chapters is called Unique, Y-O-U-N-I-Q-U-E. Thank God we're not the same, right?
Yeah.
And then I started to think about how do we celebrate the fact that I'm left-handed, you're right-handed.
Yeah.
You've got blonde hair, I've got brown hair. And as opposed to the comparison aspect,
Sure.
Isn't it beautiful that those things are different? Don't mean it to sound all woohoo and everything, but I think if we focus in on those things that we are different, we have gifts, we have strengths, is really what I was trying to do in the message. So where does that apply? It applies to business. It applies to leadership. It applies to coaching. It applies to, raising our kids. Everything.
Yeah. I mean, I know in business we talk a lot about, and particularly in looking at building leadership teams in an organization, I think it's vitally important that we build a leadership team with people that are vastly different from us. If we are surrounded by people with exactly the same mindset and exactly the same thought process, then we're never going to grow, right? And there's no new perspective that comes to the table. And so celebrating that inside of a business organization, and when I look at building, even within our organization and others that I've been witnessed or been able to witness, some of the best organizations, they have very different people in leadership positions, and each one of them are able to contribute, to the recipe of success.
Yeah, absolutely. And that whole thing, especially as we're young, we're coming out of college, we're starting a new job, that comparison thing can be very challenging, right? Because there's a ladder, there's there's growth, those sorts of things. But I think it does take some time and maybe emotional maturity to say, the fact that you're great at the analysis of the data, and I'm not, doesn't mean that I'm not. What it means is I've got something else. I can see the slant of the messaging.
No doubt.
I can see, how do we sell this upward? How do we sell this down? How do we simplify something that's complex, right?
So walk through, I think I'm very interested in understanding, just walk through that journey of you go from journaling in a coffee shop, you're there, you've got all your notes, your journals, to then transforming that into a book. What does that look like? What did that look like? Because I think some of the people in the audience, there may be some aspiring authors in the audience saying, that's great. How do I get from taking my journal and my notes to getting it to a book to get,
Yeah, I think one of the key things is it relevant? Will it matter?
Yeah.
Right? Because there's always that, at least in me, it was that this is just like my word stuff. This is like doodling.
Yeah.
At some point, right, you kind of say that. And then I started sharing these out during the process to friends,
to friends and
colleagues, et cetera.
colleagues. Yeah.
I'll tell you, one of the things that absolutely solidified this is one of my dear friends is a pediatric heart surgeon, operating on babies' hearts that are the size of walnuts every day, right? I mean, if you think about that work, right? We went to high school together. And I texted him, he kind of got on my text list, and he messaged me one night, and he said, it was 6:00 this morning when you texted me the word calm. I was preparing to do a transplant. He said there were 10 possible things that I could see when I got in there, and 10 combinations of challenges with each one of those. And I texted him the word calm, which was catch a little moment. He said that helped me take the step into the day. Now, when you get that kind of feedback, you're not looking for, wow, this is rock star, I'm getting 1 million followers. That was like, that had an impact.
Yeah, that's what That's really the aim right there, right? How is Bruce and what you're doing, essentially your mission here, how are you impacting other people? It's not about the likes and the loves and the dopamine uptake.
Right. I mean, that's validating. That keeps you going. That fuels you.
Sure.
But when my friend messaged me back with that message, it was like, okay, this is an assignment. Right? I've got to do something. It's a gift that turned into an assignment. Then you just kind of say, be a beginner at something every day. And that's what I was through that process.
Yeah.
Find someone who might be interested in the story. Contact them. What does it mean? I don't know. Yes. You say yes sometimes and figure out how later.
Sure.
So a lot of it went that way. But there's a lot of ways to do a book now. And I do want to encourage those that have a message. I think everyone has a story. We're all going through something.
Yeah.
Another dear friend of mine says we're all connected via our brokenness. Like we all have something that we're dealing with. And that was mine. And when those validations started coming back, then the turning it from a journal to a book, the momentum just really took off. And another thing I love about that word is in the word momentum is the word moment. It only takes a moment to switch that thing on, that change, that growth, that mindset switch, that heart set switch. And then we just went through it. And then, so the next part of that was, okay, Bruce, now your mission, this is kind of, as I'm kind of walking my faith walk, give these books away. Wait a minute, what? Yes, every time you're booked to do a talk, every time you sell a case of books, find a place for them to land.
Yeah.
So being in the healthcare industry, it's really easy to go to the Family Resource Center.
Sure.
Or have the CFO or the VP of RevCycle or the CIO. You say, look, before I leave, would you introduce me to? And then you go down and you just, so that was part of the mission as well.
Yeah.
To keep it going, then start speaking. And then, okay, now, what, really? I mean, I've been doing sales pitch talks all my life, but to tell my story, that's really different, Matt, than saying feature benefit, how many do you want,
Sure.
Here's a reference. No, it's like getting vulnerable with that story of losing your job and then how does it relate to someone? Because it wasn't climbing a mountain or it wasn't overcoming a car crash or an injury or a military thing, which are all such amazing inspirational stories to me. Mine was like, well, it's just a job. But then I realized when I started speaking at job workshops, it related. Yeah. And mindset was a really important part for me. So then that became something that I could start sharing. And then the TED, and then it just has become just trying to stay on my faith path walk.
Well, I want to talk about the TED in a second. I think going back to something you said a moment ago that I want to kind of bring back to the surface for our audience is just you said, someone had told you we are all connected or interconnected through our brokenness, right? And brokenness looks different in different people's lives. And I think that as business leaders, perhaps even leaders in our home, right? And as men trying to lead our families, people look to us for answers. We don't always have the answers. In fact, it's a lot better to share your brokenness and share your humility and start from a position of full honesty and transparency, saying, I don't have the answers, but I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to sit with you and we're going to figure this out together and I'm going to help guide. And I love what you're doing, through the simple power of words, right? And how God's given you this gift to be able to take words, flip them horizontally, and then come up with word phrases and groups of words, and then how that can subsequently be used to have an impact on people's lives. And just flipping the mindset, or perhaps the heart set, if you will, those things do matter, and it moves people. So are there, when you look at, perhaps, because I know you've spoken to dozens and dozens of organizations, and we'll get into the TED in a moment, but when you look at some of the engagements that you've had where you've been able to speak with management teams, leadership teams, other people across organizations, what's some of the most common feedback and things that you're hearing from some of your audiences and maybe it's feedback about what you've delivered, maybe it's feedback about just what they're struggling with or helping them understand something a little better. I think that's important for the audience to hear.
Yeah, and the feedback's been very different depending on the group, what the objective is, what the issue. So I've worked with some companies that, in a merger and acquisition scenario where they've just come back together and they want to define what culture means. So I said, okay, let's write the word culture, write it vertically.
Yeah.
Break up into groups. What does it mean? You come back and then you understand one word, what it means to people, and you put a framework around it that says you can only use the letters in the word.
Yeah.
And write a sentence or
Sure.
So that's one thing. I think folks will look at a word, we break these things down, and they'll say things like, I will never look at words the same way again. Real simple example. No, real simple example.
Yeah. I'm not looking at words the same way anymore since I've been looking at your stuff.
So it's sort of like this, right? My geekdom is finally oozing out into others, and because it's been that. It's been, wow, this is just me. And then, but when it applies, right, when you can find a connection there. Real simple example would be if someone really feels alone, behind, like left out, they don't know where they fit.
Sure.
You can just take the letters Nowhere. Know where. You move the W closer to the O and put a space. And when they've arrived and they feel connected, they're now here.
Yeah.
Same word.
Yeah.
I don't know how that came to me,
Yeah.
Matt, but it's just, so when you communicate how you can use your words written out to others, and equally as important, we can do a whole nother segment on this, the words we say to ourselves.
Oh, for
That's
sure.
script, because no one's any harder on ourselves than we are.
No doubt.
With the quiet time, right? I'm not this, I'm not that. And
the doubts that we're almost always probably our own worst critic, but yet we try to deflect that outwardly all too often.
Yep.
Right.
So we talk about that in a workshop. I say, my dad used to play a game where you'd take an old Campbell's soup container out in the street, and you take your foot and you just slap it down the street. Right. It'd be called
kick the can.
Yeah. I just say, why don't we say kick the can't?
Oh.
So you take any word that ends in apostrophe T and do your best for an hour to eliminate using that. Try to rephrase things. Yeah. The other is to
it's a good team building exercise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
That's great.
Here's what I can do.
Yeah.
As opposed to, oh my gosh, the board meeting got canceled, or you're taking the deal here, or we didn't make the margin, or whatever the thing is you're performing. You can spend a lot of time admiring our problems as opposed to turning those things into thinking about what we can do. The other one is untie the knots. The NOTS, not the KNOTS. Yeah. And so I'm not good enough. I'm not tall enough. My territory's not, productive enough. It's whatever the
knot is.
Yeah, whatever that is. Sure. So it's a lot of it's those conversations so that's a lot of the feedback is just looking at words differently. And there's research that says also, especially with kids, but really with anyone, it takes 10 positive reinforcing phrases to offset one negative. So what if we just eliminated that one negative and approached it in a way that was more constructive, more giving versus get, and it's hard, right? We're all driven, but it only takes the word calm to a surgeon friend to know you're having impact with your words.
No doubt. That's great. Let's pivot for a second. And as you've gone from the book to some of the engagements you had, and then you had this opportunity to be on TEDx, right? And to TEDx. How did that come about? Share a little bit about that experience from your perspective, and then maybe some of the teachings that you talked about on the TEDx so that our audience can get a little flavor for that before they all log on and go find it.
Yeah, sure. And the cool thing about it is, I was offered an opportunity to audition. I kind of stepped into this group that said, hey, we're going to put one on. We're going to take auditions. Here's what you do, a 3-minute tape of what you want to talk. So they gave you some instructions on. And like, okay, these guys are polished. I mean, I've watched TEDs, right? Yeah. Sam Burns' TED Talk is one of my favorites. I go and look at that, Secret to a Happy Life. Amazing. And I'm going, you really had to step in and say, okay, you have to own this gift to the next step. You're not done with it. It's continuing to refine it. So there was an audition process, and after that... And
you had to untie your own knot.
Absolutely.
It's not that I can't do it, right?
Yeah, okay. In the end of the day, you kind of have to say it doesn't matter. I gotta, I'm going in.
Yeah.
Figure out how later, I guess. Yeah. Say yes and figure out how later. And the result of that was then an in-person audition. So it was a video, and then flew to Dallas. We had an in-person to do 5 minutes of it. And that was, I mean, we've all gone to.
So is that what it was? It was a kind of, you got into this group, maybe there were some phone calls, then there was a video kind of quote unquote audition, so to speak. Then there was a live fly to Dallas. There's a 5-minute live audition.
Yeah,
so
that's
to speak.
exactly. And no introductions, no, here's the basis. You go. And very different, but everyone's in the same. It's sort of like when you're going to go out and do a run at 6 a.m. and there's 7 or 8 people there. You're going to run.
Yeah.
I mean, you just kind of get in.
Yeah.
And I was very fortunate to be selected, one of 17 speakers. I think there were 300 or 400 auditions in total. So it was quite an honor when you get the letter that says you're going to, and then it's like, uh-oh. Right now you got it. Now what are you going to do? So,
right.
I mean, and I'm actually doing.
What was it? Be a beginner at something every day.
Every day, and trust me, that's sometimes that can be an excuse. Well, I'm a beginner at it. Of course, what do you expect? But it kind of keeps the confidence, the ego kind of out of the way when you know. So that was just preparing for that was like no other presentation I'd ever done, because the hero in the story is the audience. You have to think about your talk as what idea do I want to share?
Yeah.
And then what impact do you hope it will have, knowing that no one has been through the same situation as you.
Sure.
And so that really helped me really hone future talks and about how do you do that? And how do you activate in a talk? Not just, that's an interesting idea or that's compelling, but how do you really think about inspiring someone to make a difference.
Audience to get them, so
that when they walk out of that conference or they turn that TED off or whatever, they have something they can do now.
Yeah,
activate.
Besides your book, are there any books right now that you're reading? Things that are speaking to you? Anything that you'd like to share with the audience?
There's a book called Atomic Habits.
Oh, sure.
Just about everything in that book is about how to flip a switch incrementally,
no doubt,
to make massive changes.
Great book.
That's a phenomenal book by James Clear.
I'd love for you to close this out today. Is there any sort of quote thing that you'd like to share with the audience, scripture, or whether it's something else?
Yeah, there's a couple. Kind of my life verse is I wear it on my wrist, Philippians 4:13. I can accomplish all things through God who strengthens me. I just believe we can't make it through this world on our own.
Sure.
And we need that. So that would be number one, Philippians 4:13. And the other are three words. And these 3 words are, yes, I can. And yes, I can, to me, and we use this with our kids when they were, climbing the monkey bars for the first time, or kicking a soccer ball the first time, or taking real pitch in baseball the first time, right? Yes, I can, just written vertically, is you expect success in challenging activities now. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Doesn't mean that hill's not going to be tough to climb, but you're setting your intentions in the direction that will keep your mindset in the right place.
This has been phenomenal. Bruce, hey, thanks, man.
My pleasure.
Thanks for joining us today on the Above and Beyond Leadership Podcast. I just wanted to wrap up and say, and just again, kind of affirm you. I'm really inspired by what you're doing, and keep doing what you're doing. You're having impact on people's lives. I'm excited to learn more about on our next episode with you. I'm going to have you back here in the studio and learn more about you and your family a little bit and other things. And for those of you that want to learn more about Bruce Pulver and his mission to inspire others, please check out his website, abovethechatterourwordsmatter.com. Again, abovethechatterourwordsmatter.com. You can also Google him, Bruce Pulver. You can Google Bruce Pulver TEDx. You can find his TEDx, which is called The Secret of Changing Negative Self-Talk by Renewing Your Mindset. So again, I can't wait to have you back in the studio. For all of our subscribers and listeners out in podcast land, thank you for joining us today. I hope that today's episode was both empowering and inspirational. And I hope that until our next episode, I pray that our daily lives and journeys are filled with opportunities to lift others up as we aim to go above and beyond. Thanks, everybody.
Our executive producer and host is Matt Maloney, President and CEO of FAM360. Strategic Communication Coordinator, Michelle Ducato. Production assistance by Tin Dog Studios. Director, John Roland. Creative Assistant, Whitney Roland. Theme song, Connecting Dots by Curtis Cole, provided by Artlist. Please subscribe today and don't miss any of our weekly episodes.